Thank you very much indeed. My name is Gerry Gormley from Queen's University Belfast. On behalf of my colleagues Grania, Diane and Jenny Johnson, I'd like to present to you some work regarding blurring the lines, sexuality and power in standardised patients' negotiations of boundaries. So just to set the scene in this talk, I want you to think about as health and social care professionals examining patients. Many times we will reach out and touch a patient. We'll take a pulse, do a knee reflex, take a blood pressure, and often we do that without thinking, carrying out that act of a physical examination. But of course there are certain examinations that have more intimacy and require very much the support and the ceremony of examining. For example, more intimate examinations like a pelvic exam, a rectal examination. And for sure that is a really important thing that we want to develop and train in our students going forward. And it's this area that I want to explore about breaking those boundaries when we do not go through a formal consent process, but when we have a very much a consent process in place around intimate examinations. And many times we just think that ordinary examinations are just fine, we just do it without asking. But actually, what is it from a patient's perspective in examining? And we are aware, certainly we look at our defence union societies, where in my case I'm a family doctor, where doctors have been accused of inappropriate behaviour, where it wasn't, they felt intentionally that they were breaking the personal boundaries of a patient. And we want to really examine that space. And I want you to think about some examinations, for example, examine the patient's fundi. We turn off the lights, we get very close to that person. Examine a female chest, examining a patient's groin. These areas were between not the full ceremony of an intimate examination, but a day-to-day examination that we often perform. And again, just to highlight that this is very much matters to many of our professions, and particularly our own with the GMC regarding breaking patients' boundaries. Many of us will work with SPs, simulated patients, simulated participants, standardised patients. There's many variations on the theme. And this idea that we use them, we don't use them, we work with them. These are individuals with life experiences, and we examine them in many ways, and it's really trying to get a sense of how best we navigate those boundaries when we work with SPs in teaching our students. So our study was to really explore that space of intimate examinations, or just examinations generally, but how SPs felt about breaking that personal space. We conducted this on SPs with their own institution, performing a thematic analysis in an iterative fashion of constant reflexivity. And to sensitise our analysis, we used Foucault, who is a sociologist, French sociologist, and this idea of clinical gaze. And for those of you who are not familiar with that concept of clinical gaze, if my button will go to the next slide, it's frozen, is that this essence of where you focus on the patient, the physiology, but actually it's the person that you're dealing with. It's not objectifying them, it's actually an individual with lived experience, not thinking about them just as an entity, but actually as a person, was sensitised our analysis. So let me share with you some of the boundaries, some of the themes that we had. So first of all, boundary negotiation. SPs communicated boundary crossing as negotiative power consent. It was very much considered about the student and their relationship and negotiating the examination. And at times with more intimate examinations, for example, examine their eyes, they felt that there was a sexuality came into that space. And SPs describe themselves more as teaching tools to facilitate their learning rather than people. I'll give you an example of a quote. There is your patient, semi-naked. What part of that patient do you like to touch? Well, he's quite happy to touch it now. Get used to it. This is not a problem to you. Okay, so this is the SP reflecting on comments that they've heard. Boundary violations, so breaking boundaries. SPs described times of little recognition of their personal space. Just get on with it. Just examine the SP. Often SPs would use metaphors, sexual metaphors, to describe this examination being examined and breaking personal space, draw an emphasis on their perceived passivity I'm just here, I have no agency, I have no real oversight in oversee of what happens here in this teaching activity. This comment we have often heard, certainly in medicine, can you take everything off from nipples to knees? How often we say that, but actually do we really mean that with our SPs? As you say, some of them just pull the curtains back and you're left there like a piece of meat, just lying down by a series of students examining. Protecting those boundaries. How do we protect that boundary management? If SPs felt insufficient attention paid to their individuality, they felt disempowered, they felt exposed. When SPs' boundaries were challenged, they could display potential discomfort by asserting their individuality at that time. And actually taking off the disrobing was very symbolic for them and a way of them expressing their agency. You're immaterial, you're only here to examine you, but you're not, you do not tell what the findings are. You're not here at all, you're somebody, you're nobody. I should just be, but I should be the centre of attention. So it's really this focus on just the physicality of the examination, but actually them as a person. And I say, no, it'll do here regarding the exposure of the abdomen. I'm happy for you not to lower my gown any further. So just putting some of these findings together in some sense making of what we discovered in our research is that potentially working with SPs, there is a potential risk of objectifying and how we work with SPs to facilitate learning. Their experiences challenge the assumptions that SPs will do whatever we want. Actually, no, they need to be worked with in terms of navigating those boundaries. What we feel for implications for practice is that simulation is a very valuable, important teaching tool, but we've got to be careful that we don't project inequalities, that it's okay just to examine patients like this. It's very much about treating the person with the signs and symptoms. We need to make sure that we have this culture change, that SPs, we don't use SPs, we work with SPs. They're individuals with experiences that we need to incorporate. And make sure that help students understand that any examination should be treated as an intimate invasion. Even simple examinations is breaking personal space, and they need to navigate that through the process of consent. And remember, consent is not a static one-off, it's a dynamic, continual process through examination. So, conclusions. I think this research has given us greater insights to some of the power dynamics that can exist between SPs and students, and this idea of the clinical gaze, not just treating the SP as a physiological entity, as a tool, but actually as a person who has experiences. Every examination can potentially be intimate, and therefore we need to make sure that we emphasise the importance of that. And again, in the professionalisation of SPs across the world, is that we're working with them, legitimising their importance in education and giving them a chance to contribute to the development of their education and the education of healthcare students. And making sure students constantly reflect whenever they're examining patients that the power of touch, where yes, it can be a very benevolent, but also there's a fine line between that and be considered as potential invasion of their personal space. Thank you very much indeed.